So I wanted to give you guys an overview of what web scraping is and how I use it in my business. And so if you guys have ever been in a store and scanned a barcode and then put the cost to figure out the sales rank and the profit, you're kind of already familiar with the process. But as you notice, you're doing this one at a time. And if you ever thought maybe there's a better way to do this, there is. And so if you're familiar with wholesale, you know that some vendors will give you a price list along with their UPCs, and then you end up uploading that to a software to analyze it. The issue with OA though is that websites don't have this option. So the problem we have to solve is how to get all the UPCs and the prices out of a website. And so this is something that I've done and did, and this is the final output that you're seeing. So we're going to end up using what's called a programming language, and a lot of them can do this, but the one that I use is called Python, and it's free. But you may be asking yourself, I don't know how to program, and if I'm being honest with you, I don't know how to program either. What I end up doing is I use ChatGPT to write all of my Python scripts for me. And so prior to ChatGPT, there was kind of this skill gap that sealed off like the pathway to be doing this, because the alternative was to either learn it myself, which is it's an involved process and it takes a long time, or I can hire someone else, which comes with its own pros and cons itself. Mainly in that you're at the mercy of their schedule and their availability. If they quit and they take the script, then you're in a bad spot. If they give you the script and it breaks, you don't know how to fix it. But with that being said, right here, what we're looking at is the final output of a scrape. And so we get a lot of data points. And the reason we want a lot of data points is I try and think of it as whoever has the most information is going to make the best choices. And so another byproduct of that is we get to choose the best setups. And so here you'll notice a lot of standard things like profit, ROI, rank, and stuff. One of the metrics I like here is velocity. I should probably make a separate video on how I use this. But for our case here and keeping it brief is whenever we buy something or I buy something, I want to know that there's velocity behind it, because if there's no velocity behind it, then I have no way to sell it. And so by having that question answered out of the gate with this data point, it's great, because the other byproduct of that is when I review this, now I can buy that much deeper, because in this case, this one potentially sells 200 a month. We have to do due diligence and make sure that it's able to sustain that level of a period, assuming we're not doing like a seasonal play or anything, but that's gonna be part of the due diligence. And so what we're looking at here is this is a clearance section for Kohl's, and it outputted over 400, almost 500 results for matches to UPC to ASIN. So we still need to vet this, but at least our starting point is so much better because no time's being wasted on, is this the same item? Is it profitable and all that stuff? And so Kohl's is useful in that it includes the quantity levels. This data is going to be like 2-3 days old. But what's cool about this is, I need to be loading it over here, sorry. I have it set up so that you click on the source link, which will take you to Kohl's, and the ASIN. So because we still want to do our due diligence and make sure that everything matches. So we're looking at large, large, and this is large, and the color is the same. And so then it's a matter of just running the numbers and making sure that it's profitable, you're gated and all that good stuff. That's going to come down to your ability as a buyer and doing your due diligence. Because we want the starting point to be at least like, this is matched, and then we make the judgment call if this is something that makes sense to our risk assessment. For me, I generally don't like Amazon, and so that's why I have this data point here that'll tell me Amazon's historical out-of-stock rate on a 90-day period. In this case, they're only out of stock, it looks like 16% of the time, and I'm seeing that reflected here in the graphs. So if I want to be sneaky, I want them to be out of stock like 100% of the time. So something like this, we're not expecting to see Amazon on it, but it has another problem in that it gives IP complaints, which is something we want to avoid. But for proof of concept, we know that Amazon's not on this listing. And so that IP complaint is something we're going to catch during our due diligence as well. But like if we want to sort the data that way, we can do it. Or, there's so many different ways that we can sort the data, which leaves us in a really privileged position. And so I kind of wanted to show you guys what it looked like. What we're going to do is I have this script set up to run automatically, like no inputs. This is one of the fastest scripts that I have set up for Shop WSS, just so you know what web scraping looks like, because it ends up being a puzzle. And part of that puzzle, when we were using that wholesale example earlier, was that we need functionally a price list. And the wholesalers give us that price list, but OA websites don't. And so functionally what we're doing is we're creating that price list. And so the whole missing component into this whole process is us getting that raw data. And so it just finished right now, and it sent me a message on Discord. And so this is what we did in real time. This just got created. And so the website output 31,000 UPCs. And as you can imagine, a normal human sourcing one UPC or one listing at a time isn't going to be able to compete with this, because a computer does this, it's automated, it never gets tired, no burnout, no nothing. And so it ends up being or leaving you in a position where like no one can compete with you unless they know how to do this. And so that's nuts. So this is just one website. So then the idea is you just keep running more and more data and you're taking the best setups. And so I wanted to give you kind of like an overview in terms of competitive advantages that you get from UPC scraping, because we're already kind of seen this and self-evident. But why did I end up choosing UPC matching? I like it because it lends itself best to automated sourcing. It's the closest thing we're going to get to in terms of wholesale, in that like we're able to produce price lists on demand. And that way no time's wasted. Because one of the problems with sourcing sale items is that, yeah, the sale item could work, but the problem is if you ever want to replenish that item, the item's not on sale. And then you're in a position where you don't know if it's ever going to be on sale again. So you don't know when, if, or for how much it's going to be on sale again. And so that's going to mean that you're constantly having to reevaluate new sale items all the time. It's kind of like you're reinventing the wheel. And so with the web scraping, you take all of that pain point out because it's automated. So you don't really care that you're constantly looking at sale things because they're all one-time purchases. And so like that gets solved, and that's fantastic. And so the other thing is too, you want to be the first one to source a sale because that's going to be the greatest selection, right? So if something goes on sale, you want to run it on minute one, because the idea is I'm in Pacific Standard Time in California. If a sale starts at 11 a.m., someone on East Coast, that's 1 o'clock in the morning and they're going to be asleep. And so if you're being fast, that's going to be a competitive advantage because you can buy these things and stock them out before the East Coast counterparts wake up. Again, you're going to want to take the best setups too. And since you're going to have so much selection, you can be really picky in how you deploy your capital. Some websites will list their inventory levels, like Kohl's and Nike. And so that leaves you in a position to stock out listings. And that's going to give you like a moat to be able to like not have to worry about outside competition coming in. Assuming the website doesn't restock, there's no real way for us to know this, but assuming they don't restock, that leaves you in a really good position. Think of something like Black Friday, where you have like the doorbuster sales and stuff. Those would be fantastic things to like knock out. This whole process relies on matching UPCs against ASINs, and this is going to be dependent on Amazon product catalog. And so the way that they make every page, or the way it's supposed to be made, is that every ASIN is supposed to have a UPC assigned to it. This isn't always the case, but in our case, what ends up happening is we're matching that UPC to the ASIN. And so what we're looking for as a result of that is the quality of match is going to be the highest possible, assuming, again, that the product catalog is accurate. And that's why that's going to be the best method to automate. If you've ever used anything like tactical arbitrage, you can do title matches too, but what ends up happening is it's kind of a lower quality match, and you're going to create a problem during the review process because you're going to need to be constantly on guard to be like, oh, is this the same item? Because it's not always the case. If I were to give you like a percentage, I don't know what it's going to actually be, but like in terms of accuracy, if it's like 60 or 70% accurate, I mean, that's pretty good, but you're going to waste a lot of like man hours doing that vetting for that alone. I like doing this specifically for account health, meaning if I ever get challenged on an inauthentic or counterfeit claim, it's going to be that much easier to defend because the UPC is matching what's on the catalog. And so I can go back to Amazon and say, hey, like this is a 100% match of what's listed on the website. Like, leave me alone. And you're in a much better position if your paperwork reflects that, because then you have a UPC to point to that says like, hey, this is the same item, like leave me alone. The other thing too with these is once the script's set up, we don't have to rewrite it, assuming the website doesn't change. I think I've had a website change twice in the 2 or 3 years that I've been doing this, or more often than not, I'm making improvements. Like recently, just as a side story, I was setting up Macy's and realized I didn't pull out like a coupon code value, and I applied 25% discount to the entire data set, and that code only applied to things that were eligible for it. So I had to go back and say, okay, I have to grab that data point that says if it's eligible or not, and that way I can isolate it and discount it correctly. One of the big things that you want to do is, and this is the closest thing that we can get to wholesale, and this is why I mentioned it, is we can get replenishable items. So assuming we know how to manufacture the margin with coupons or gift cards, we can run those discounts on full price items. And it's kind of like we're hiding in plain sight, because normally what happens is everyone's trained to only source sale items, and they're going to ignore that full price items. So this is going to come down to your ability in terms of your ability as a buyer and like your site mastery on whatever you're sourcing. Because now you can run it through the scraper and you can run the entire website ideally, and then you'll know what's coming back. And if it's profitable because of those coupons, that means it's replenishable. And so those coupons and gift cards functionally act like an on-demand sale. And that's what makes a replenishable item. And that puts you in a really powerful position to guarantee like a baseline of income. For a starting point, I like to think too is that you want your starting point to be reviewing leads, not having to find them and doing all that stuff. Because if you've done it the old way, you can land on a lead, but then it's wrong, it's gated and all that stuff. If this is all done up front, what this is going to mean if you ever introduce a VA is that you don't have to teach them how to find leads. Their starting point is vetting the leads that are already found and doing the due diligence on them. One of the things that I also like doing here too is that there's days on Rakuten where the cash back is above 10%. And so I like credit card points. And so I'm not opposed to farming cash back on things that have high velocity because I can buy really deep and more or less I'll buy like single digit things. Obviously you want highest profit possible, but if my objective is to get like 20% cash back, I'll buy things like at a 10% ROI because I'm going to get 20% cash back that's tax free through Rakuten. And like that's going to leave you in an awesome position in terms of flexibility if you just want to like manufacture spend and stuff. Because the other side of that is you can push up revenue on your account, and when it comes time to applying for credit lines and stuff, you're going to show more revenue and then you're going to get increased credit lines. So even though it might look funky on the books at the time of the sale, you're going to win on the back end when you're applying for credit because you're going to get larger lines and stuff. And not only that, it's going to give you more opportunities to get feedback or reviews on your account if you're trying to like farm it. So it's just kind of another neat tool to have in your toolkit. I like to call this one being first to market. And so I do everything FBA, but if you were to list things on FBM, meaning on day one of a sale, what you want to do is you want to list your item because every time there's a sale, there's a little bit of a lag time before the market reacts to that sale price. And so if you can execute in that narrow window before the market has had an opportunity to react, you can get elevated profit and it's really nice. This has to do with earlier. You can set up, what I end up doing on my scripts is I only output things that are in stock, but you can have the data sets output things that are out of stock and still calculate the profit on them. Because then what you can do is you can set up page monitors. And so the hope is you're trying to catch a restock. And so since you've already went through the trouble of finding all the data and stuff and you know it's profitable, the only missing component is that it's out of stock. Setting up those page monitors makes it so like you're working without working. It's like you're actively monitoring it without you're passively monitoring it without actively monitoring it. The other thing is too is that you can set up keep alerts on things that you like. Let's say like, since you already found the source, what you're just waiting for is the entry point because your entry points are either going to be your cost comes down, so your profit goes up, or the selling price goes up and your cost stays the same and the margin goes up. And so if you have things that are already matched, you can set up these keep alerts and when the price goes up, you already know the source and then you can replenish it or purchase it. And so the big thing is with anyone that wants to work independently, if you're doing 100% OA, you can work anywhere in the world, which is phenomenal. So if you're on vacation too, and you have your laptop, you can do that. All of this isn't without its downsides, and so I like kind of showing both sides of the story. So in terms of cons, this means we can only work on websites that have UPC. If there's no UPC, either because it doesn't exist or we can't find it, we can't scrape it. But that's not necessarily a bad thing because there's so many websites out there that have UPC that functionally you're probably not going to notice. There's an issue of getting false positive matches, and this isn't through the fault of the scraping process. It has to do more with the product catalog having the wrong UPC. And we're going to catch this during our due diligence phase. And so what I mean by that is some sellers are, say, gated in Nike, and they might use an Adidas UPC with a photo of a Nike shoe. And so as far as the computer is concerned, it matched accurately on that UPC, but we know as a human, like Nike, that's a Nike shoe, we're using an Adidas UPC or vice versa, and that's not right. And so you're going to see instances of that, but realistically, that's like less than 1% of the data. The other issue too is your development time versus your output, meaning it would suck if you spent like 3 or 4 hours setting up a website and only 100 UPCs came out. And of those 100 UPCs, like only 2 are worth like even considering. So that's why it's always important to try and set up on websites that you're familiar with at first, and as you branch out, then you'll add them to your rotation. So something like Kohl's, I think it has almost close to like 200,000 items. And so you know that at least if you set up that website, you have 200,000 items to like vet through. And your chances of getting something worthwhile are going to be that much higher because the product catalog is so expansive. The other thing is too is that the setup process can be tedious because every website's different. And so what we end up having to do is it's called reverse engineering. And it basically means we have to figure out how the website works and interacts with itself, and then go backwards and build it out. And so the other thing is too is that there's levels of security with every website. So at this level, just think higher security means it's going to be more expensive to run. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but there's a cost component with doing all of this. And so that's going to be a fun part on the technical side. I've noticed that you can get incorrect matches against bundles on the profit calculation. And this is because what ends up happening is you might get instances, and I've seen it isolated to bundles, but what ends up happening is it might match to a 6-pack, but it calculates the profit assuming a pack of 1 unit count. And so kind of what ends up happening is you need to multiply it by 6 to match the 6-pack. In a perfect world, what's happening though is that you're capturing a 6-pack and you're calculating against a 6-pack. When it messes up is when you capture a single unit and you're comparing it against a 6-pack. You're going to notice that with bundles, but that's not normally an issue. I don't do grocery, so I don't run into that. But you can code it in a way to basically just multiply it by whatever that number is, calculate it accurately. Or when you're doing your due diligence, you can calculate that manually and see where it works. And so the problems we need to solve, like as humans or as the coders, is we need to verify that the website has the UPC first. Because if we don't get past that point, there's no point in building out the rest of the scripts. And so once we verify it, we need to reverse engineer the website. We mentioned it earlier. We need to figure out how it's structured. We need to figure out where the data is. We need to figure out how to get it out, and we need to successfully get it out. And so once we can figure that all out from a proof of concept standpoint, we want to write the scripts, and then we want to get the raw data. As we saw over here on Shop WSS, we have, this is the output. Okay, so yeah, this is the raw data that we want. This is the component that's missing in the whole process. This is the technical side that we need to figure out and master and develop that skill set, because that's what's missing in the whole process. Because everyone else that doesn't know how to do this, they could take this data and then, kind of move it along. But there's still more process in how to set it up and analyze it. So kind of what the point I'm trying to get is that you don't get to this point like randomly. You have to be very deliberate in getting to this endpoint. And so once we get that raw data, we have to process it, and then we have to work with it. And I have a process myself that I call qualifying leads into purchases, because getting this isn't enough. You can't just buy things blindly and assume it'll sell and produce these outputs. You need to minimize your risks as much as possible to avoid the common pitfalls and stuff. And so I have that expressed here. Oh, I don't have a lopsided value. But what ends up happening is, like in my case, what I'm trying to give as an example is you don't want to, if something's selling for say $50 99% of the year, and we run it on the day it's selling for $100 a year, we know that more than likely it's not going to sell for $100. It's probably going to revert back to its $50. And so I have that data point reflected here, and that's what I call price stability, because I'm always of the opinion that things are going to revert back to its historical price average, and I need to know that. And from the data review process, I'm going to be able to see it from this level, but the end all be all is always going to be looking at the Keepa graph. But at least I can, from a vetting standpoint, like I can delete things at this level. Because, what ends up happening is there's 500 leads here, and like that's too much time. And so if I'm strapped on time, that's going to be a method for me to be like, okay, I only want to look at the ones with the best setup or the greatest chance for highest price stability. And so how does scraping fit into the overall structure of an Amazon business? I say that Amazon has 3 pillars. You need liquidity, which is your capital and your credit cards, basically your ability to buy the leads. And so once you have that, you want the leads itself, meaning lead flow. And this is where scraping comes in. And so the next problem you're going to create is if you buy too much, you're going to need to figure out the labor component. And that's going to get solved either through a prep center or employees. But usually this is the progression that you're going to need to take in your journey to scale your business. Because you can't have labor if like there's no leads, and leads aren't going to do you any good if you don't have capital to buy them. And so once you get all 3 in place, then you're in a really good position to keep things going. And so it ends up being, why do we want to be the one to know how to do the scraping or the programming? It's what I consider the highest skill in the business to have. We want to spend our time setting up new websites and let the VA vet the websites or someone else buy them, because the yield is going to be so much higher. And we want to be specialized and have custom solutions, because that means there's going to be less competition, because there's no off-the-shelf software to replicate this. And so it's going to leave us in a really good position from a competitive advantage standpoint, that no one can compete with us because we're just processing too much data. I wanted to show you guys, do I still have the browser set up? Okay, yeah. I'm going to show you my little scan over here. Let's see if I can do it off-site. I'm going to do it on the dashboard just to give you an idea of how many I've done. So I have scanned over 39 million UPCs since I've been doing this, just to give you context. Your normal OA buyer seller isn't going to know how to process that level of data. And so the thinking is, you want to add as many websites as you can over time, and so your product catalog or places you can source will be automated, and you just keep running data. You just run data, run data, run data. And so this is just the output from one clearance section. And this is going to be a little bit lopsided, because I normally don't see numbers sold this high, but this is like your North Star that you're trying to go to. You only want to buy things that have velocity behind them, because that's how you're going to scale your business. Can you like make money off of things that sell like 4 times a month? Yes. But the problem with that is, you know, if it goes wrong, it's not going to bankrupt you, which is great. But if it works, like selling 4 of something isn't going to give you financial freedom. What you need is, you need like the ability to compound your money with this number sold metric. And that's what this is solving. And so if you want to like, I think the saying is squeeze blood from a stone. Like if you want to be super thorough and go through all these, now you have that capability of doing that. And it's a fantastic position to be in, because then it's going to turn into an issue of, you're going to review this until you run out of money or until you get bored. And that's such a privileged position to be in, and that's why web scraping is so powerful. This ended up being a little bit longer than I anticipated it to be, but this should be a good enough overview of kind of like what you walk away with once you have it set up. If you have any questions, I'd probably do a follow-up video of how all these columns are set up, but yeah, let me know.